Hi, and welcome back to Tech Talk. I'm Ken Mingus, Executive Editor at Computer World. I'm here with Michael Nadeau from CSO, Michael Simon from Macworld, Serdar Yegulalp. I hope I got that right, Serdar.
Yegulalp.
From InfoWorld. We're going to be talking about what's trending in IT for 2018, so hang out. Stick around. Okay, so thanks everybody for being here today. Michael, I wanted to start with you because you know, one of the things that's plagued security, I guess probably since the start of computing, was passwords and making sure that things stay secure. And you've got some thoughts on what's coming up this year?
Right. I think in 2018 we're going to see the beginning of the end of the password. The password is broken, and I think everybody knows that. Hackers can crack them relatively easily. Users are really bad about taking care of them, and you see these band-aids that are put on them, like 2FA, that are sometimes implemented very badly, and that does absolutely no good. So what's happening now, and you're starting to see it, and particularly among the vendors of identity and access management software, that they're offering solutions that are kind of more fully developed, layered, to provide authentication. So the problem in the past with doing something like this, the technology has been there, is this idea that companies don't want to get in the way of the user experience to add these added layers of authentication. And so there's a constant balance between the user experience and providing good security. And a lot of companies have said, well, users aren't asking for it. Well, that's changing because you had the Equifax breach, which a lot of people took notice of, and before that, the Anthem breach. So you have your financial data now exposed, you have your health data now exposed. People are asking questions about security. So this year is a good opportunity for companies to start implementing new authentication schemes.
Does this? I'm just wondering. You know, when I think about the death of the password, you know, you start thinking about other ways of authenticating. Obviously, you've got things like, and again, I'm an Apple guy, but like Face ID, or Touch ID. Does that play a role? Is that something that
it can? The problem with any biometric is that it can be compromised, and once it's compromised, you can't change it.
Good point. You can't change your face, or your thumbprint, or whatever.
And some companies are storing biometric data in a single database on a network, which means it's like putting a big bullseye on that for hackers saying,
"Come and steal me."
Yeah.
In Apple's case, it's a secure enclave on the chip itself. So it's not like Apple doesn't have access to that, and someone hacks Apple, like they're not going to get a bunch of faces and fingerprints.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that's important. But a different kind of biometrics is probably more important. That's behavioral biometrics.
Okay, what's that? How does that work?
That would be things like how you type on the keyboard, primarily how you type on the keyboard, how you interact with the computer, how you've interacted with a website. Software is available to keep track of patterns of user behavior. So they over time they build a model for each individual person, and if somebody's logs in and does activity on a website that is outside of that pattern, it raises a red flag.
Is that something that would like use AI to sort of?
It can. It's AI machine learning. You see a lot of solutions out there that say they're machine learning, but they really aren't. What they've done is they've built a static model of behavior that they compare the activity against, but the computer, the software, isn't actually learning on the fly.
Okay.
Now, if there's no more password and you're saying biometrics is problematic, like how do I log into my computer and secure it?
Well, I think you're going to see this happen in stages.
Okay.
What you're going to see this year is the password's going to still be around. But when you log into, say, your bank, you log in with your password, all you'll be able to do is like see your data. If you try to do a transaction, then you're probably going to have to do something like get an SMS code sent to you for second factor authentication. Then in the background, there might be some analytics going on that is looking at your behavior, looking at device metrics like the IP address, what kind of device you're logging in from, where you're logging in from. All this kind of technology has been around for a very long time. That credit card companies have been using it to detect fraud. And now it's making its way into user authentication.
So it's a sort of thing like, okay, I've got an Apple, I've got an iPhone. If suddenly I tried to log into my bank account from Manila with an Android device, even if I had the right password or something like that, that would be like a red flag that would stop whoever from trying to do any transactions.
Yeah, and then the vendor or the website would have a choice. In those instances they could require that additional authentication from the user, or they can simply deny the action.
So when you say the death of the password, it's more of the death of the password as the primary security identifier. Okay.
Yes.
And that brings up a possibility for why this might not take. That did come to mind, which is user resistance, and also, user inaccessibility. Like I have fingerprint authentication on my phone, and I use it for a lot of the applications that are available there, but I don't really have a way to do that on my PC. Now, somebody might find a way to allow me to use the fingerprint recognition on my phone as a way to do that on the PC as well, but that's another link that is potentially friable and that may be difficult for somebody who's not a technical expert to set up. So the one problem that I see here is end user resistance. We all understand a password. We all understand the concept of a PIN. But if we're suddenly having all this other stuff thrown at us, I'm wondering, aren't we just going to get frustrated and say, look, just bring back the old way. It was just so much easier. I can't get anything done this way. That's the one thing that I hear most often from a user when they're confronted with a new method of authentication is they say, I can't use this. They get very frustrated very quickly. How do we fight that?
I think ultimately what you're going to see is a lot of the authentication is going to become invisible to the user. But you're not going to see that right away. You're going to, like I said, you're going to see it happen in stages. So the password login is going to be around, and 2FA is going to be around, even though that has problems. But the idea here is to just make it as hard as possible for the hacker to want to break in. And companies are trying to look for a happy medium there in their particular circumstances as to how much do I need to put in here. And when you look at the identity and access management solutions, basically what you're doing is you're selecting authentication methods from a menu, and the company decides what they're going to implement based on what they know about their audience and what they'll accept.
But they still need, the consumer still needs to kind of opt in to location sharing, to things like this, if that's, or even behavior, whatever it is.
They have to say yes to it.
Yeah.
If they consistently choose not to say yes to it, it's of no use to anyone.
Yeah, and Google just announced, or whether it's a study, but something like 60% of Gmail users don't have 2FA on. It's not something that consumers are embracing on a large scale yet. So even with the hacks.
And the user's a big block there. And you're right about the location data, because after May, companies, that's considered personally identifiable information, and companies have to handle it in a certain way because of the GDPR regulations.
Yep.
So it's an issue, but again, the awareness of the risk out there among consumers is rising, and if companies are smart about the way they sell this to the consumer, I think they'll be a lot more accepting of it.
Okay. I agree. And the reason I say that this goes back to the Equifax thing. My mom, who's 80 and has a little iPad and a computer at home, doesn't think about security really, doesn't think about two-factor authentication. And yet after that Equifax breach, she was asking me about it and ways to secure her bank account and things like that. And if it's reaching her as a need, something that needs to be done, I think people may be less reticent to jump on board as long as they feel like what they're doing will be secure.
Yep.
And that it is easy to do. I agree. The user is usually the roadblock here, but it does sound like this year is going to be a year, at least, of a lot of companies trying different ways of adding layers on top of things, security layers to secure your data.
Right.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Any other thoughts on the death of the password? I'm not so sure I want to see it go away. I think passwords are fun, but
I don't know if
it's
can
still
go
hugely
away.
useful as a quick and dirty solution to this problem. You know, there are times when I just want to type a password or a PIN. You know, sometimes 4 digits is really all you need.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And they have, password managers and things where you can have strings of numbers and letters. It doesn't have to be like your birth date or something.
I swear by those myself.
Yeah,
but at the same time, I recognize completely that this is just one thing that needs to be part of a larger mix of solutions.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah. We'll have to check back end of the year and see if the password's still with us. Thanks, Michael. One of the things I wanted to bring up and talk about is we're looking at 2018. One of the things that seems to be very clearly evolving and morphing and showing up in a lot of industries is blockchain, which is a very, very hot technology right now. Lucas Marion at Computer World's been writing a lot about it. And I mean, as you may know, it started out as sort of the underpinning of cryptocurrency like Bitcoin. But since then, because of the way its distributed nature and its inherently secure nature, allows companies to do different things with it. And so I've been really struck over the last month or two with some of the things that companies are doing. For instance, this could very easily be the underpinning for a new global shipping platform. The global shipping company Maersk has teamed up with IBM, and what they're looking to do is create a secure way of tracking goods as they are shipped around the world, so that you know when the goods have left port, where they are at any given time, when they've arrived at the port of destination, when they've been cleared by customs, and everybody that has a role in where those goods are going or coming from can sort of see in real time securely where they are. And so, according to Maersk, this is something that, when it's rolled out over the next 3 to 6 months, could save the industry billions of dollars, because they're still using paperwork, literally paperwork, to try to track where things are, whether they're in port or not. So that's one example. And something else that we wrote about this week involves the idea of blockchain as the underpinnings for let me get this right, peer-to-peer managed cloud service, which could, allow people to, if you've got extra, storage at home or in your data center, and you want to become part of this managed cloud service, blockchain could be used to sort of dole out where files are stored and then actually pay people in cryptocurrencies for the amount of storage that they use, like on a monthly basis. It would be some minimal fee.
It's almost like Airbnb for your server.
It's like crowdsourcing your storage around the world on people in dribbles and drabs on people's and data centers extra storage. Again, we'll see if this happens. The problem that companies are running into is that blockchain is not easily scalable, because each chain in the that's part of the blockchain requires some CPU, and the more you add to it, the more people you add to it, it doesn't scale up very easily. So I think this company Storj and FileZilla are trying to figure out how this would work. But if they can figure that out and get this up and running, one of the companies that Lucas quoted said that you could have storage like Amazon Web Storage, but at like 1/10 the cost. I mean, it's the sort of thing. Everything that I see about blockchain is that nobody's quite sure how best to do it or exactly where it's going to go, but that it has the potential to be highly disruptive to a lot of industries.
I think the problem seems a little bit even more fundamental than that. There's this story that I heard once about the invention of the laser, which was that when it was first invented, they measured it in gillettes. A laser beam that could punch through a single Gillette razor blade in 1 second was called a 1 Gillette razor. Yeah. And if it could punch through 2 in 1 second, it was called a 2 Gillette razor. And the reason they came up with this metric is because at first they couldn't think of anything to do with this miraculous invention except blow holes in razor blades with it. They had to sit there and say to themselves, we've got a solution, but what's the problem?
Yeah.
I see the same thing here. Blockchain is this incredible solution, and we're thrashing around trying out all these different problems to see which ones of them really fit this particular solution. I don't think cryptocurrency is it, frankly. I think that cryptocurrency manifests more as a kind of an accidental Ponzi scheme, in the sense that I don't think that it was designed that way, but it's certainly how it's evolved and certainly what it's starting to turn into for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But the underlying idea that you have a database that is distributed and immutable, there's clearly potential there. We're just still in the phase of thrashing around trying to figure out exactly what that purpose is.
Yeah, it's sort of like the internet in like 1989 or 1990. You
Yes,
see
exactly.
a lot of potential. You know that this is going to change things, but you don't know how best it'll be used. And I just find it fascinating because, you know, there are so many little companies that, I mean, real estate companies are turning to blockchain because they can use it to, if you know, you think about it, when you're buying a house, you just bought a house, you understand this.
I don't understand blockchain, but I
No,
understand buying
you
a
understand
house.
buying a house, but okay. So you've got, you know, you've got the buyer, you've got the seller, you've got the financial institution, you've got the insurance company, you've got the legal work, you've got the local city or town or whatever. All of these entities have a role in making sure that this process goes smoothly and goes from start to finish. And there's a company, I can't remember now where it is, maybe New York, that has put out a platform that would allow real estate agents and buyers and sellers and financial institutions to sort of track a sale or multiple sales in real time. And so you can make sure that these steps are being taken in the right order. You know, just an interesting, yeah, Mike.
I question that real-time claim because a big problem with blockchain is it's extremely compute intensive.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of time to build whatever it is, the ownership chain or whatever it is that you're trying to build in blockchain. And before it can be practical for a lot of these applications, that performance issue has to be overcome.
Yeah, that you're absolutely right. That's the scalable issue, the scaling issue that this cloud storage effort was running up against, because as you build, it becomes more and more, as you say, compute intensive, and you've got to figure out a way almost to have different nodes that do certain things and other parts of the blockchain that do other things. Again, to be determined. I want to get back to Serdar's point about cryptocurrency, though, because I agree completely that, you know, I mean, blockchain started out as kind of this way of allowing cryptocurrencies to be traded and bought and sold. And, you know, to my mind, it does just look like a giant Ponzi scheme. It's like this Wild West attitude out there. Oh, I've got to have a Bitcoin, or oh, I've got to have whatever, you know, cryptocurrency is fashionable today. You see these fluctuations in value, and one day it's 14,000, the next it's 20, the next it's 8. I mean, this sounds like, you know, it sounds sort of like the real estate market in 2003 or 2005 when people were rushing in buying these things. And, you know, you're buying something that theoretically has a value, but it's not backed up by anything. I mean,
that's the other problem. We don't even know what this thing really is when it comes to what a cryptocurrency is supposed to be. Is it a store of value? Is it a currency? Is it a commodity?
And what do you do with it once you have one?
Well, you hang on to it and wait for the magic growth to take place, and then you somehow cash it in, and you make billions of dollars, and you retire at 28. You know,
and that to me just sounds like wishful thinking. You know?
It's beyond wishful thinking. It sounds crazy, and but it is amazing. I mean, you've got companies right now. And this sort of goes back and forth between blockchain and cryptocurrency, but you've got companies that are, you know, adding like to press releases words about we're doing this with cryptocurrency and we're doing this with blockchain, because they're buzzwords and people know that there's something there or think there's something there.
You know, Kodak just did this. But the thing is that the idea that they have is actually not a bad one, where they create a blockchain database where image assets are stored in it. And if you want to license a particular image, it becomes much easier to do so because the data for that image, including its hash and, you know, all of the other things that can be used to identify it visually,
right,
those are encoded in the blockchain. And so there's a great idea there, and I would really like something to come of it, whether it's from Kodak or from whoever. But right now there's just so much anarchy, so much thrashing around.
Yeah, I do hope that the craziness around cryptocurrency doesn't spill over and sort of besmirch blockchain, because I think blockchain in and of itself has a lot of potential, depending on the scalability issues that, you know, we're running up against now. But I think we're going to see a lot of this stuff start to shake out in 2018. Cryptocurrency, it definitely has become something that's beyond just the ability to move money back and forth and not be part of like the regular financial system. It's becoming like an asset that you buy and hang on to, you know, an alternate gold, but it's not backed up by anything. So it's only worth what everybody thinks it's worth. that just doesn't sound like a solid investment to me. So,
I mean, with the U.S. dollar, it's backed by the entire United States economy.
Right.
So there's something, and the United States government's assurance of that economy. So there's something there. But with blockchain, or specifically with Bitcoin and all of its derivatives and all of its spin-offs, it's not very clear what it's backed by.
Right. I mean, if you've got a $10 bill in your hand, you technically have just a piece of paper with some fancy printing on it that, everybody recognizes and assumes is worth $10 because of the economy and the gold stores or whatever. I could write down something that says this is $1 billion, Bitcoin here, and it, I just think that there are a lot of people who are in for a big fall this year around cryptocurrency. Okay. Anyway, so I think we've we've talked that one out. Serdar, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about serverless computing and what's coming up this year, or what are you seeing as a trend?
I should start by explaining the term itself.
Please.
When we say serverless, right now the way the cloud works is that if we want to run something up in the cloud, we spin up a VM, and we run the program in question inside the VM, and this is usually a pretty top-heavy process, and then we've started replacing this now with the idea of the container, where you have an encapsulation of just the program that you want to run, much more lightweight than a VM. And serverless works as an adjunct to the idea of the container. Is instead of running a whole VM or spinning up a whole VM, you have just a snippet of code which is spun up and run on demand. One good example of how this works would be for responding to an API. Instead of writing a whole application just to respond to a single API request, you just have a piece of code written in the language of your choice that performs the response, and it's spun up on demand and spun down on demand. So when people say serverless, it's kind of a misnomer because there's still a server.
Right.
The thing is that you're not the one maintaining it. All you are doing as a developer is writing this piece of code, uploading it to somebody else's server, and they handle all of the scaling, they handle all of the operational burdens, they handle all of the actual nitty-gritty. All you have to worry about is the few lines of code that perform whatever business operation that you need to be done. So for the developer, this is a great idea because it makes development much faster and less burdensome. You don't have to go back and forth between ops guys. You don't have to do any provisioning of your own. You just pick the language you want to work in. You focus on the one aspect of the problem you're trying to solve, instead of thinking about all the infrastructure that you want to erect around it. So there's the whole issue of procurement and provisioning all but goes away. And this is great because it's another step in the direction of the whole model for cloud development becoming that much more developer friendly. A guy sits down at his notebook or at his workstation, and he writes the code that he wants to run, and he uploads it, and that's the end of it. He doesn't have to sit there and think about all of the other wiring and plumbing that has to go around it.
Right. Is the idea here that this is something that will streamline code development and allow developers to really do a lot more very quickly because they're just focusing on the little snippets of code that they're dealing with rather than all this other stuff around it?
Right, exactly. And the other thing, again, is that you have the choice of language and language runtime, because many of the most popular of the serverless systems, like AWS's version and Google's version, and all support all of the major language runtimes that are used in business applications. There's Java, there's Python, there's Go. So you're not, and it's set up in such a way that if another language runtime comes along, they don't have to do very much work to integrate it. The only reason that the number of language runtimes that they have tends to be fairly restricted is because they want to make absolutely sure that it runs 100% perfectly. So, they will in time add that many more languages to the list, but it's not difficult for them to do so. That's another advantage. Mm-hmm. It also, it makes it easier for them to add that many more ways for developers to get on board.
Okay, so obviously this is good for developers. I can get that. In terms of the overall infrastructure, is this something that is less compute intensive, therefore it's more efficient? I mean, I'm trying to figure out where this might show up most often now or in the years ahead.
It can be much more efficient because you're only running this one little snippet of code on demand as necessary. For something like an API, again, that's like the perfect use case for it when you're just responding to as an API endpoint. Beyond a certain level of usage, though, it starts becoming competitive with a VM because you're getting to the point where it's running almost nonstop, and at that point, you might as well just go to a VM if it's efficiency that you really want to focus on. Yeah. The other problem that I've noticed is that it's not so much a question of it being complex to handle or competitive with a VM in terms of its efficiency, but it's a problem of hidden cost, because when you start at a very low level volume for a serverless function, it's not easy. It's not hard to see how much it costs, because it only runs very occasionally and the cost amounts to maybe a few pennies. But as it goes up, as the usage goes up, the cost breakdown can be much more difficult to suss out, especially in a place like Amazon. And it's because the costs tend to be spread out over a great many services. You don't just have the cost of running the function. You also have the cost of the network traffic to and from the front end. You also have the cost of the database utilization. You also have the cost of all the monitoring like CloudTrail and CloudWatch, and so on and so forth. And that stuff adds up, and it can be very difficult to predict ahead of time how much it's going to add up to. Yeah. One of the advantages of the way things work in a VM is that we've got a very good understanding of how much all of those things can cost, and we've got very good tools to aggregate the costs that tend to accumulate around the use of VM. Not quite so much with the serverless. This isn't to say that it can't happen. It's just that it's one of those things where it can really blindside you if you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, is that something that might actually serve to hinder where this is going until they figure out a way to keep track of these costs as it scales up?
I think it's something to watch for.
Yeah.
I think that falls mainly to the developer side to be conscious of it, and not to simply to throw caution to the wind and say, oh, we're just going to save so much money by turning this into a serverless function, and then finding out that that's not the case.
Yeah.
There are ways to ameliorate it, but the idea is that because this is a new way of doing things, you have to stop and remember that a lot of your old assumptions simply don't apply. It was the same way when we went from VMs to containers, because people drew a lot of false parallels between the way the two operated. And now, mercifully, that has faded away. But now there's still some misunderstandings that can persist about the use of a serverless function versus the use of a container versus the use of a VM.
Yep. Okay, cool. Interesting. Any thoughts here?
Well,
you guys?
Well, this reminds me of the old service-oriented architecture.
Yes, exactly.
That was popular like 12 years ago. And one of the advantages of that was you write one piece of code that, write once, deploy many. So that's obviously reduces your development overhead. So I would assume that's a big advantage as well.
Yeah, it is. And the thing about SOA, though, is that the difference between SOA and the modern way of doing it is that SOA is a bit more like, building with cement blocks, and the serverless or as they call it, the Lambda architecture, and the container models more like using Legos. There's the dependencies between the individual pieces are a lot more freely reassociatable, and while that has problems of its own, that's again one of those things where you don't want to take too much for granted when you put these things together. You don't want to end up in a position where you've essentially built another monolith. It can be enormously more flexible than the SOA method.
Wow, interesting. Okay, cool. All right, I think we're going to move on. Totally changing topics now.
Finally, something I know something about.
Yeah, because Mike's been very quiet.
I thought blockchain was a wrapper when I first saw the word. I'm not even kidding.
No, it's not a wrapper. It's a distributed ledger technology. Blah blah. Never mind.
Apparently, 50 Cent did have some Bitcoin.
He did,
squirreled away.
Yeah.
You can't make up a joke like that. I'm sorry.
So, HomePod.
Okay.
And I really want to know this because I'm an Apple guy and I want to know whether I should get one or not, because I've already down the line with Amazon Alexa. So what's going on?
Well, for one thing, it releases tomorrow or tonight or sometime in the morning. Apple hasn't exactly said, but usually when they do pre-orders, it's a 12 a.m. Pacific time situation.
I'm not getting up at 3 a.m. to order a speaker.
So 3 a.m. Eastern or wherever the applicable time zone is your area. There's reports that they're pretty limited as Apple products are. People have been throwing around 500,000, 1 million. That's probably not accurate, but if you want one, you should probably pre-order it.
Yeah,
they're $350, and that's where the problem comes in, because we're not used to paying $350 for a smart speaker. And here's the rub: Apple is not selling it as a smart speaker. They're selling it as a speaker, a home speaker. They say it revolutionizes home music and blah blah blah.
That falls in line with a lot of the way that they position themselves.
Yep.
They've not positioned themselves as a tech company. They position themselves as a lifestyle and consumer
company.
Sure.
Yeah. So this is about the sound.
This
not
is about
being
the
smart.
sound, yeah. And the big thing is that it works with Apple Music, which none of the other home speakers do, Google Home, Amazon Echo, what have you, you're locked out of Apple Music, and that's by Apple's design.
Right.
And Apple Music has some 30 to 35 million subscribers, so it's not a small service by any stretch. I subscribe to it.
I do too.
And it's a good service. It's, you know, the benefit obviously is if you have a huge iTunes library, it pulls everything up to the cloud and you have access to everything. And when you add a new track, it integrates nicely. So that's the benefit for the Apple ecosystem. But the big thing is this is the first real service that integrates by voice with a smart speaker. Mm-hmm. So if you're an Apple Music subscriber, you're going to be interested. However, it costs $350. And we're used to $100 Google Homes. We're used to $49 Amazon Echo Dots.
Right.
Even the most expensive Amazon device is only $2-something.
But again, it sounds like this is aimed primarily at Apple's audience, which is used to paying premium prices.
It is. You're absolutely right. But Apple is entering a war right now. I mean,
and they're late, very late.
They're very late
game.
to the battle, and
that's not unusual for them either, though, is it?
No, it's not.
They've almost always been second or third
not
in
this
line
late.
to do things. They want to do them right.
Well, this feels late, and it feels like featureless,
late and half baked.
Yeah, it really does feel like they're coming in late, and I don't think they've got the killer use for this, right, other than if you're a technophile, I mean an audiophile who has to have the best sounding whatever, and you haven't gotten a Sonos yet. Maybe.
First of all, if you're an audiophile, you're not streaming music.
Right.
So there's one problem there. Yeah. But there's Google Home Max, which has a very similar array of speakers, a larger woofer. So that's going to sound pretty similar. There's the Sonos One, which is a smart speaker, which has the Sonos technology behind it, which is good. Apple Music only streams, I believe, in 256.
Yeah, correct.
So we're not talking about, a high quality, like Tidal quality sound here. We're streaming music, and it's supposed to, learn your space and learn where you're in, and use the acoustics of your room and bounce sound offs dynamically. But, is that what people want in a home speaker? When people hear home speaker, they think Alexa, they think Siri, and they think Google Assistant.
Right.
And those features in HomePod are secondary.
Could this be a situation where Apple is focusing right now on the audio part of it in an effort to just get people to buy it, and then we'll be building out the Siri stuff and the HomeKit stuff around this
maybe so
down the road? Again, even then, they're really late.
They're really late, and let's not forget, Siri was first.
I know.
We're how many years? 5 years now.
5 years.
Amazon came along years after and leapfrogged them. Google has only been out for 2 years, and Google Assistant, and they leapfrogged them.
Yeah.
Apple has been very slow to either understand what the place of a AI assistant is in your house, or they just aren't interested in those types of uses yet. And there's nothing that I see in HomePod or in iOS or in anything that Apple's doing that suggests they're on the verge of a breakthrough in this department. And yeah, Apple does arrive late to many parties, but they bring some awesome food with them to these parties. I mean, and you want to. HomePod is expensive.
It feels like a bag of chips as the party is winding down.
A really expensive bag of chips that I don't know if anybody wants to eat.
Exactly. And yet you're going to be up at 3 a.m. to order one of these.
I have to have one because
explain that.
Well, 2 reasons. One, it's my job.
Okay. Okay.
And Apple's not in the business of sending these things out to everybody.
Okay, because it's your job.
But number 2, I have a lot of home speakers in my house. I have 4 Amazon Echo devices. I have 3 Google Homes in various rooms, and I want to see how it integrates, what Apple brings to the table here. I don't use HomeKit for anything. I have Ring, I have Nest, I have Hue. I have a ton of smart stuff in my house. I tried them all. I integrated them all.
My favorite HomeKit with the Hue? Because I do.
I can.
Yeah.
But I find that I can just say, Alexa, turn on my living room lights, and boom, done. Yeah. I don't have to go into my phone, go into an app, do slide.
You can say, "Hey Siri."
Yeah, but my phone has to be near me.
Yeah, true. Oh,
and that's
sorry, Siri. Never mind.
When I'm home, I don't want to be worried about where my phone is.
Right.
So yeah, Siri will work with HomePod and will work with lights, but there's a lot of things that don't.
Right.
Apple was slow to that game as well, where they forced smart home manufacturers to have a chip.
Well, HomeKit came out, and then nothing happened with it
because Apple. Placed these kind of draconian rules on them. Amazon said, here, if you want to put Alexa, here's the code.
Right.
Amazon said you have to authenticate with this chip. They're just removing that in 11.3.
Right.
So that's going to change, and that will presumably speed up, adoption of these devices. But there are HomeKit manufacturers that just have a HomeKit device in addition to their other ones because Apple made it so tough to kind of, to integrate Siri and to integrate HomeKit into their devices.
Which is surprising because, I mean, Apple's whole, shtick is that it just works. Things just work. And
it just works if you pay us.
That too. But I mean, in terms of like the, the IoT home automation stuff that's going on right now, things don't just easily work.
Right.
I mean, just trying to connect up a Philips Hue bulb to your Wi-Fi and then authenticate it to your phone app and then get it to the, you got to add the skill to Alexa. And this is not something that most people are going to spend their time doing.
Yeah.
And Apple could rush in there if that was the, the reason for being late and just say, one solution, easy to set up, done.
Right.
They're not even doing that.
Apple doesn't even sell a mesh system. They don't even really sell a Wi-Fi.
They've gotten away from
anymore.
Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
I know.
I mean, everyone's doing these mesh systems where you blanket your home with Wi-Fi, so you can run these cameras and things without worrying about it. And Apple doesn't. They're getting away from the Airport Extreme stuff and the Time Machine stuff. And they were leaders in that department too. Ease of use. It was more expensive, but it was easy to set up. It provided a great strong signal, and you could back up all your stuff easily. And
then they walked away from it.
And they walked
basically.
away, yeah.
Right.
So we'll see. I mean, Apple needs to have HomePod, and they need to have a horse in this race. So it's good that it's coming out, and it's good that they're doing it, and they'll sell a couple million to people like me and you, and who are Apple.
I'm still on the fence officially.
All right, well, maybe not, but
we'll know tomorrow.
They'll sell plenty of them to early Apple adopters, and then we'll see where it goes. Because by all accounts, Amazon is the far and away industry leader, and Google Home not too far behind, and HomePod is right now not even out of the gate until tomorrow. So.
Well, pre-orders tomorrow, arrives on February 9th.
Yep.
Presumably, we'll be back to like 2 or 3 or 4 weeks of delivery after about noon tomorrow, if not before.
No question about that. Yeah.
Because limited supplies, which
it's also missing multi-room audio, which was one of the features they touted.
It's going to roll out later this year. After an update. It
looks like 11.3 in the spring.
Because that was one of the whole points is you get 2 of these things, and then you could they would adjust to
$700 later.
Yeah, exactly. So. All right, so Apple maybe, I guess we're going to find out, but maybe this is...
I don't think it's a misstep. I mean, they can do it. They can do whatever they want. They have tons of money.
Big, yeah.
So they, but I think they need to focus a little more of their energy on what HomePod means to the smart home movement.
Agreed. Any other thoughts, Serdar, Michael, on HomePod? Not going to be up at 3 in the morning to buy one of these things?
I'm not an Apple user, and I've always been a little leery of home automation technology in general, in big part because so much of it seems so half-baked or underbaked.
It is.
And because a lot of the solutions, again, they seem like a solution that's in search of an actual problem, because a lot of the things that are solved by it are not things that I find myself tripping over.
I don't know. When I say Alexa good night and all my lights go off and my alarm system sets, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I mean, maybe some of it is because I grew up in a household where I was trained to shut off the lights every time I left the room because electricity was expensive. So, it's one of those things where when the use case comes and it seems really compelling, then I'm going to take a real interest in it. And right now the use case seems it's incremental, not really transformative or revolutionary to me. And it needs to be more than that for me to really make a commitment to it, especially a $250 per piece commitment.
$350.
$350. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I see. To me, I think the use case is when it gets tied to geolocation, and you're driving home and you walk up to your house and the lights come on and the door unlocks and the music starts playing and all of that, which sounds like something out of 2050.
Well, you can. My lights go on when I approach my house.
Yeah.
You can do.
I just
parts
realized.
of that now.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just realized there is another valid use case for this, which is for people who have physical disabilities.
Yes.
Absolutely.
There's a friend of mine who is almost completely blind and almost completely deaf, and he is actually. I think he would be, for instance, a very good market for this sort of thing because it would allow him to do a lot of remote control without endangering himself.
Yep.
So things like that, I think, are relatively underserved by this because it doesn't sound anywhere nearly as science fiction-y to a lot of people. It sounds very niche-y. But the thing is that we've become that much more conscious of how people with disabilities do want to live that much more completely, and this is a way to empower that.
And Apple is, they're at the forefront of accessibility with the iPhone and things like this that they do. So I'm absolutely sure that going forward, that will be a spotlight or an area of concentration.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. And it's also, these things are also useful for people living alone, elderly, in terms of giving them some connection to the world that they don't have to figure out a computer. They can just say, Alexa, something, something, or Siri, do this or that, and dial 911, something like, anything like that. So I do think that there are ways this will gradually work its way into our world. But I agree, Apple's expensive and late to the game.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Any other final thoughts about anything we've talked about?
What's blockchain again?
Distributed ledger.
That's always the hardest part, isn't it?
It is.
Explaining. Everybody is like, I'm going to invest in it, and they don't even know exactly what it is.
Blocks in a chain, distributed ledger. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Do it off the air. Mike, Sardar, thank you so much for being here. Now you know what we know.